Welcome to the first in a series of Self-Esteem for Success. Let me start by telling you a little bit about why I think self-esteem is important, and then we'll define it. Incidentally, I've been asked whether it's true that I've written over 50 books. I said, yes. Well, where did you find time to write 50 books? And I said, well, I've never written 50 books. I've written one book in 50 different ways, because everything that I've written is related to self-esteem, and some people will say I'm obsessed with the topic of self-esteem, and that's a legitimate criticism. But I think I have a right to that position, because self-esteem for success and self-esteem for happiness, self-esteem is probably the single most important factor in our lives. And the reason for that is this. When we see something, we assume that it is there. We don't feel that we are hallucinating. Now, if I have a vision, a perspective of something, so that is its reality. And if I have a perspective of myself and a concept of myself, well, that is my reality, and it's a very important part of my reality. And if my perception of myself is that I am in some way inferior, inadequate, incompetent, anything negative, if that's my perception of myself, then that's my reality, and I believe that anyone who looks at me is going to see what I believe is there. So if I think about myself as being inadequate, inferior, incompetent, I am certain that everyone who looks at me is going to see me that way, and I am going to relate to the world in that way. And I think you can see from there on the appropriateness of the title, Self-Esteem for Success. Right? Because if you have a negative opinion of yourself and you think that everybody sees you as negative, you're certainly going to have many barriers to a successful development. Now, the word esteem is, of course, related to the word estimate. Right? How do you estimate something? Well, it depends on what it is and how you're going to appraise its value. But if you have a home that's worth $1 million and you estimate it at $100,000, well, you're certainly shortchanging. If it's your home, you're shortchanging yourself. Similarly, if we are talented, well-endowed, bright, attractive, with all positive kinds of features, and we don't see that, then we are underestimating ourselves, right? And that is low self-esteem, okay? Now, self-esteem, what is the self? Well, this is the self. I am myself. And wait a minute, this is a body, right? And is that all we are, is a body? If all we are is a body, then we're no different than any other animals. And of course, science makes the mistake of saying that we are Homo sapiens. Now, Homo sapiens in plain English means that you're a gorilla or a baboon with some intellect. And whereas sapiens or intelligence is certainly important, that isn't everything that constitutes a human being. There are many other features that a human being has that makes him a human being and separates him from being animals. Right? Such as we have the ability to make improvements in ourselves, to become better people. Animals cannot improve themselves. I don't believe that any cow has ever thought, what do I have to do to become a better cow than I am? Right? We have the ability to think about a goal and purpose in life. We have the ability to make moral and ethical judgments, very often in defiance of what our body would want. So we are not slaves to our body the way animals are. We have the ability to sacrifice ourselves, sacrifice our efforts, our comfort, our belongings for the welfare of someone else. Right? We have the ability to forgive. We have the ability to search for truth. I mean, we can go down the list and pick up maybe 10, 15 unique abilities that comprise the essence of a human being in addition to his body. Right? So, what is the self? The self then is the body, of course, which is a significant part of ourself, plus all of the unique features that make us human. And for the sake of simplicity, I combine all of these unique features, and I call them, the sum total of them, the human spirit. Right? So what is the human spirit? It's not a religious term. The human spirit is everything about a human being that separates him or her from other forms of life. Now, how do we get an image of ourselves? And let me ask another question of that. My practice has shown that low self-esteem is a significant contributor to every kind of psychological problem that a person can have. It is present in most people in one way or another. Sometimes it can be global, that a person feels himself to be inadequate or inferior in everything. And sometimes it can be partial. A person may feel himself to be very competent in one area, but may feel himself to be inadequate, incompetent in other areas. And the point is, these are unwarranted feelings of negativity. Right? I mean, if a person is limited and has limitations, that's understandable. And that doesn't cause a self-esteem problem. The self-esteem problem is when a person does not recognize the skills and the talents and the abilities that one does have. Now, why does this happen? There may be several reasons. First of all, I think it may be partially due to civilization. What do I mean by that? A number of years ago, there were a group of psychologists who did an interesting experiment. They built an experimental house. Now, what was experimental about the house? Well, they built the house for adults in the same proportion as a regular house is for children. In other words, the ceilings, instead of being 9 feet high, the ceilings were 30 feet high. And the chairs, instead of being down here, the seat of the chair was up there. And the table, instead of being over here, the table was up there. And the doorknob, instead of being over here, the doorknob was over there. And then they took some perfectly normal people and have them live in that house. Within several days, they began showing neurotic symptoms. And think about that. Our children live in a world that was designed for adults. It's a struggle to reach a chair, it's a struggle to reach a table, it's a struggle to reach a doorknob, and all the kinds of things that is natural for us are a struggle for a child. So the child is living in a world of giants, right? And this may very well cause the child, at the childhood age, 2, 3, to feel tiny, impotent, powerless, insignificant. Okay? And sometimes I wonder whether primitive peoples who did not have doors and furniture and whatever, and they sat on the floor and they slept on the floor and there were no doorknobs to open, maybe their children grew up with a better self-esteem than we have in our culture. So I think that the self-esteem problem may possibly be part of civilization. There are other causes that can contribute for self-esteem. Very obviously, if someone has parents who do not give a child adequate love, parents who are neglectful, parents who are abusive, which is even worse, parents who thoughtlessly will say to a child, "You're stupid," or "You're clumsy," or insulting terms, obviously that can seriously contribute to a person developing a low self-esteem. And these kinds of things, these kinds of impressions that a person has at age 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 in childhood are very, very deep. And even though the person may later recognize that they were wrong and recognize that their parent was thoughtless and that their parent was neglectful and abusive, that's not going to take the feeling away. That feeling can be very profound and may remain there. And we'll come back to that a little bit later as to why that feeling may be resurrected in different ways years later, and how important that is to understanding the role of self-esteem. However, I can't thoroughly blame inadequate parenting or circumstances that may not be the parent's fault. I mean, a child may have lost a parent. A father died or mother died. A child may have been raised in a foster home that was not a natural, loving home. I mean, there are many things that can happen to children, right? And there's so many circumstances. I may be just rambling a little bit, but years ago, when the same family, when a family lived in the same house for 3 generations, there was stability and there was identity, and a person knew where he or she belonged, and they had neighbors and friends. Today's world is a mobile world. The average family may be displaced several times, moving from one place for another, because a person has to follow where her job is, right? And so the person has to be uprooted from here and go to another city, and the child is 6 years old, and the child loses all his friends and now becomes the new kid on the block and has to break into a new social culture. These kinds of things are traumatic for kids, and they did not happen in the same frequency many years ago. So cultural things do have a significant effect, and social things do have significant effect on how our self-esteem is. But as I was about to say before, I really can't hold all those things responsible for self-esteem. You see, one of the reasons that I am a champion of self-esteem is because I suffered so much from it. And it wasn't until I was 38 that I came to a realization that my self-perception is wrong, and that I am a much better person than I had ever given myself credit for. And so I had negative feelings about myself, and there's no way that I can blame this on my childhood or parenting. I had a wonderful childhood. Loving parents, they were doting. In fact, I had a nanny who the sun rose and set on me. So I was not deprived of love or care in childhood, and yet I developed a low self-esteem, and perhaps I'll have a chance to talk about that. So there are other factors. Now, it's interesting that in his later life, Freud made a proposition that in addition to the human being having a survival instinct, a desire for life, that there is also a death instinct, that within each individual there is a force that tries to destroy him. That's a tough thing to grasp. I mean, why would that happen? There really is no good reason for it in general philosophy. The Talmud does have a reason for that. The Talmud says that within each individual there is a Yetzer Hara, a evil instinct that wishes to destroy him. And that is perhaps what Freud was referring to. And that is an instinct that wants to crush him. And the way to crush a person is to tell him you're no good and you can't achieve anything, and convince one that one is inadequate. So it may well be that if Freud was right, that there is this thanatos concept, that is the internal destructive force, which does not have to be rational. Instincts are not rational. And if Freud was right, that could help us explain why there are so many people who grew up in good circumstances and yet find themselves feeling very negative about themselves. There's this internal force that makes one feel negative. So there may be a variety of reasons for the problem of a person having low self-esteem. And I think we've defined the self as being a sum total of the body plus all of the unique features that make a human being that which he or she is. Now, I think it should be evident that if a person has a physical deficiency, that the body is not going to function well. For example, if a person is deficient in iron, so he has an iron deficiency syndrome, in which case he'll feel sluggish, he'll feel tired, feel depressed. And if he goes to the doctor, and the doctor does some blood tests and comes up with the finding, you know, you're low in iron, so he's made a diagnosis, and in order to help the person feel better, he will prescribe iron. Now, if he does not prescribe iron, he can prescribe every vitamin on earth, and the person will not feel better because the deficient substance, the missing substance, is not being provided. So there are a number of deficiency diseases: iron deficiency, vitamin C deficiency, vitamin D deficiency, and in each case, the treatment is to provide the missing substance. Now, we talked about a human being as being a body, and if we have all our proper nutrients and we're in good health, good, then the body is complete. But that doesn't mean that the self is complete, because there's something else except our body. And there's all of these unique features that we talked about. Right? Now, if those are deficient, if the person does not implement those features, then a person can have a spirituality deficiency because he is not fulfilling that part of himself. Right? So that if a person does not have a goal and purpose in life, and we said, look, one of the things that separates a human being from animals is that people can have a goal and purpose. What am I living for? What do I want to do with my life? Now, no giraffe or gorilla or orangutan ever thinks about what's my purpose in the jungle. Right? But if we lack the concept of a goal in life, and I just, for 70 or 80 or 90 years are floating around the universe, that doesn't give a person much of a sense of self-esteem. I might tell you at this point that one of the things that makes me a little uncomfortable is when I go into an office and I see a fish tank. Well, what's wrong with that? Well, these fish are swimming back and forth 24 hours a day, right? And they're not doing anything. Right? And I stand there and watch them, and then I wonder, is anybody up there watching me going back and forth here and there and here and there and here and there, and I'm not doing anything? So it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. For all I know, the fish think that they're doing the most important thing in the world, swimming around. Right? But I think that we have to think about what is my life for. Because if I don't have a purpose in life, that doesn't give me too good of a sense of self-worth. So if we don't fulfill that aspect of oneself, then we're deficient in self, we're deficient in self-esteem. Right? If I don't try to do something to better myself, in whatever way I think is better, but if I don't do anything to better myself, I'm missing that aspect of humanity, and I'm missing an important part of myself. If I am totally selfish, what a strange term. What do you mean by selfish? Self-centered, I'm only interested in self-gratification. Strangely enough, that's a contradiction in terms. I am not being selfish. Why? Because myself requires that I do things for others and that I be considerate of others. And if I don't do that, then I am not selfish. In order to really be selfish and take care of oneself, then one has to do all the things that are part of the self. And if I don't do that, then I am deficient in something of the self. And if my self is deficient, that is a part of low self-esteem. I have a lot of desires. Well, of course I have a lot of desires. I'm essentially an animal body, and I have every desire that an animal has. But if I don't do something to control those desires, and I just act out in an animalistic way, well, I can't feel too good about myself if I don't restrain myself and I just give free rein to everything that I do. In fact, a human being is the only living creature that can consider oneself as being free. Because you see, animals aren't free because animals can't make choices. An animal must do what its body wants. If an animal is hungry, it must go look for food. There's no way that animal can get up in the morning and say, I'm going to fast today. Right? Now, I may be hungry, and for various reasons, I can decide I'm not going to eat. Whether it's for diet reasons or for fasting or whatever, I can control myself. But if a person doesn't have self-control and is driven by impulse or compulsions such as an addiction, well, that is a loss of self. And if you lose that part of self, you lose self-esteem. So what self-esteem depends on is a true awareness of oneself. What are the problems? What are the reasons that one may not have a true awareness of oneself? Well, it's obvious. If looking at myself is going to lead me to discover some defects in my personality, I don't want to do that. Right? So there's this denial defense that we have that I don't want to recognize certain faults in myself. Oh, I can easily recognize faults in other people, but I'm not quick to recognize faults in myself. Okay? And if I do find something that might be a fault in myself, I use my intelligence to rationalize it, right? And to justify it. And we are great at rationalizations, right? So one of the things that stand in the way of self-esteem is the fact that we don't want to recognize our personality defects, and if we don't recognize them, we can't do anything about them to correct them. Right? Now, some people may say, well, I'm always that way, that's the way I am. It's not the way I am, that's the way you've chosen to be. And some people will say, well, you don't understand, my father, my mother, my upbringing. I said, well, maybe you are what your father and mother made you. But if you stay that way, it's your own damn fault. We do have the capacity to change ourselves. We don't have to be prisoners of our past. Now, I know that in psychotherapy there's a great deal of emphasis on the past. And if you go see a psychologist or psychiatrist, he's going to want to know your past history, and I don't deny that that's important. But I do think that we ought to get off of the track of blaming our parents for what we are, because the psychology of blame is that if I can find someone to blame, then I don't have to do anything about it. It's his fault, it's her fault. Right? And that's why I think there's a mistake in looking for blame. Another thing is, I can't do anything about the past. Why focus on it? I have a beautiful little cartoon with the comic character Ziggy, and Ziggy goes up to see his guru in the Himalayas, and the guru says to him, now because your future is determined by your past, you must be very careful about what you do in the past. Right? So, yeah, I recognize there's some importance about the past, but I think we should pay much more attention to what kind of things can I do to make myself into a better person, to get a better understanding of myself, a better feeling of myself, a more cheerful and positive feeling that's going to enable me to be successful, and to be successful in many ways. Now, self-esteem, knowing oneself, means that I have to recognize my defects so that I can be able to correct them. I have to recognize my talents. I have to recognize my abilities so that I can capitalize them and use them well. Now, you might say, well, obviously every person is going to want to know what his strength and his abilities are. That's what makes the person feel good. Well, I wish it were as simple as all that. But there's a complication there. And the complication, I think, can be best understood with an example of a case that I had of a young woman who was 24 years old, and she was admitted to the hospital for detoxification from alcohol, although she at first denied that she drank that much. Well, the first day that she was in the hospital, she asked whether she might have psychological tests. I said, well, why do you want psychological tests? She says, I'm afraid I might have gotten brain damage from drinking. I said, look, my dear, don't worry about it. You don't have brain damage. Well, the next day, she came up to me and she said, could I have an electroencephalogram, a brainwave test? I said, what do you want an electroencephalogram for? Well, I'm afraid I might have had brain damage from drinking. I said, I thought I told you yesterday not to worry about it. You don't have brain damage. Well, the next day she came up to me whether she can have a CAT scan of the brain. So what do you want a CAT scan of the brain for? Well, I thought I might have brain damage from drinking. Well, I began to be curious as why is she so concerned about brain damage when it's obvious that she doesn't have it? So I sat down and talked with her a little bit, and then it became very evident. She's looking for a way out of responsibilities. And if she could get a diagnosis of brain damage, although it's a devastating diagnosis, she would now be able to tell her family, don't pressure me about getting sober. I don't have the ability to do it. Don't you understand? I'm brain damaged. Right? What, you want me to go to college? I can't learn anything. I'm ineducable. Don't you understand? I'm brain damaged. Right? You expect me to hold a responsible job? I can't hold a job. I'm brain damaged. So the diagnosis of brain damage, again, as devastating as it would be, would have been a perfect out to her for her to lift the responsibilities that she wanted to avoid. Now that may sound like an extreme case, but in more subtle ways, it can happen to many people who could recognize, if they recognize the talents they have, they would feel an obligation to live up to them. And it's so much easier to ignore them and to just float along and be content. Right? Now, contentment is a pleasant feeling, but it's not a feeling that is compatible with self-esteem. Well, why do I say that? Well, once in the supermarket, I saw on the shelf where they sell evaporated milk that there was a can of milk that said, milk from contented cows. And I thought, why should I care whether cows are contented or not? Well, obviously, this producer wants to impress me that his product is superior to others. His milk is better than other milk. Why is his milk better than other milk? Because his cows are contented, and that makes them excellent cows. Oh, so the degree of excellence in a cow depends on how content the cow is. And if what I'm looking for in life is to be content, right, then I share a goal in life, a standard of life of excellence with cows. And I'm too proud for that. Right? Nothing wrong with being content. There's nothing wrong with having pleasure, nothing wrong with enjoying life. But come on, as human beings, we have a greater ability, we have a greater responsibility to make something of ourselves. And if we were able to do those two things, to first of all identify what are our character defects and then work upon them to eliminate them, and to identify what are our character strengths and abilities that we can use to advance ourselves, then I think we'd be well on the road to a good self-esteem and have the proper attitude to be successful. So we've seen some of the ways in which a person may have low self-esteem, and I do want to get into a few minutes about how self-esteem can manifest itself in our daily life. But I did make a statement earlier that self-esteem may be global, meaning a person may have feelings of inadequacy in every way, or it may be partial or compartmentalized. So let me give you an example of that. I chose as my personal physician the doctor who I recognized was the best doctor in the hospital staff. He was a wonderful person and a very, very competent doctor. He would come to the hospital at 6:30 in the morning, and he had many patients who he took care of, and he would spend time and see all of his patients. And then he would go into the electrocardiogram room and do all the interpretation of the electrocardiographs. And then he would go into the medical record room and do whatever he had to do in the medical record room. And then he would teach some student nurses. And then he would teach some medical students. And then somewhere around 1 o'clock, he would take off to his private office. And he would stay at his private office until about 6 o'clock, come back to the hospital, again, make the rounds, see his patients, etc., and hang around the hospital until around 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. Well, one night I was on duty, and here Dr. J was walking down the hall. It was close to midnight, and one of the nurses said to the other, "That man never wants to be home. You know, he's always here at the hospital, right? I suppose that his wife is a very terrible person." Well, sometime later, Dr. J came over to me and he said, "Hey, I wonder if you would see my wife. She's gone into a depression. And I gave her an antidepressant, but I really shouldn't be taking care of her. So would you see her?" I said, "Of course." Well, I was anticipating this terrible woman, you know, and the person who came in was the most gentle, lovely person that you can imagine. And she said to me, she said, "Dr. Twerski, you know how devoted John is to his medical practice. But she says, I'm a very needy person, and I needed a shoulder to put my head on. He was never home for that. Our children grew up without a father. If they were sick, he treated them. But to give them guidance or advice, he was never there for that." Well, then I got to know my doctor a little bit better, and I realized what the problem was. You see, he knew that as a doctor he was excellent. He was competent. He knew his medicine, he knew his laboratory, he knew his electrocardiograms, he knew the radiology, he knew everything that he was supposed to know about medicine. And so being in a hospital where he felt competent, right, that was comfortable. But now he's going to go home. And at home, they don't need anybody to do physical diagnosis or to read laboratory studies, electrocardiograms, or x-rays. They need a person to whom to relate. He did not feel about himself that as a person that he had any merit, that there was anything that he could contribute to anyone as a person. And consequently, he ended up depriving his family of a wonderful father and of a devoted husband. So you see, in his situation, his low self-esteem was not global because there was part of his life that he knew he was very competent. But it was just in other parts that he did not feel competent, and in those parts he avoided. Now, there may be times when it's necessary to stay late at the office. That happens no matter what your practice is, whatever work you do. There may be times like that. But I think that many people who spend extraordinarily late hours at the office may be doing what Dr. J is doing. Right? They are staying where they are comfortable because home is uncomfortable, not because there's anybody at home that is irritating or bad or whatever, but because they don't feel about themselves that they have anything to offer as a human being. And that is, unfortunately, a serious mistake. And you can easily see why that is going to interfere with a person's success. Right? A person who feels inadequate about himself is not going to make good human relations. Right? A person who has a low self-esteem may have a horrible fear of failure. Now, failure is unpleasant. Nobody likes failure, right? However, you don't succeed at everything that you do. And if you try and do something and you don't succeed at it, well, you swallow that and you take a look as, can I see what I learned from it? What was my mistake? And you go on to do something else. You go on the next thing. And as unpleasant as failures may be, they are not devastating. However, if your self-esteem is low, and you already believe negativity about yourself, you can't handle a failure, because a failure is going to confirm the worst feelings you have about yourself and make you feel worse about yourself. So if you have low self-esteem, you're going to try to avoid failure at all possible costs. Now, how can you avoid failures? Well, there's two ways. The most simple way is don't try and do anything. Right? If you stay in bed until 4 o'clock every day, you can't make any mistakes. Right? You can't have any failures because you're not doing anything. But of course, that's the worst failure at all. Right? Because you're doing nothing with your life. So avoiding things is a way to protect yourself against failure, but it's a very destructive way. Certainly stands in the way of any success. You have to be able to accept adversity in order to succeed. J.C. Penney said, "The thing that made my success was adversity." And we'll get to that perhaps a little bit later, but we have to learn to overcome struggles. So one way that person with a low self-esteem is going to protect his fragile self-esteem is by not trying. Okay. There's another way, and that is be perfect, and then you can't fail. So you become a perfectionist. Now, there's one problem with that, and that is that no human being can be perfect. Yeah? And if you're going to try to be perfect, you're going to get so wrapped up in meaningless details that you'll never get to first base and never be able to do anything. And I've seen people who were perfectionists. No, wait a second. There has to be a little perfectionism in everything that you do. You want to do something, you want to do it right, of course. But there is a normal degree of attention and detail that you pay, that you deal with. Right? Now, look, if I get on an airplane, I want the pilot to be a little bit perfectionistic. I want him to look at all those dials, right? I want to see that they're all in place, right? I don't want the pilot to get in the seat and say, okay, let's get this thing off the ground. No, I want him to make sure that everything is okay. But if he is going to check each dial 1,800 times, right, and he's not sure of himself, maybe I better do it. And instead of taking off at 1:30, the plane is going to take off at 5:50, that's not what I want. Right? So there's a normal degree of perfectionism, but a person who has low self-esteem and is terrified of a failure may try to be so perfect that he ends up doing nothing, and that's the worst mistake of all. So self-esteem for success, you can see why that's so. If you believe in yourself and you trust yourself, then you'll take reasonable measures to try and do things right, but you won't be terrified, you won't be anxious, because being terrified and anxious is going to stand in the way of a successful performance. Now, let me just mention quickly some manifestations of low self-esteem. We've already pointed out perfectionism, or the fear of trying anything. Right? There's other kinds of things, and I got to go back into my own history. Because of the way I felt about myself, I had thought about myself that people won't like me, that I'm not really a likable person, but I wanted everybody to like me. So what I did was I became a people pleaser. I try to do things for people, not because it's the good thing to be considerate for others. Now, that would have been a good motivation. I try to do things for people in order to buy their approval. Right? My life was dependent on other people approving of me. Right? And that can be a major drawback to success. Right? You can't please the whole world. Right? You've got to be truthful with yourself, know what it is that you want to do it as the best you can. Right? And you're not going to succeed all of the time, but you can't go through life expecting a universal approval. The other thing was, because I had this negative feeling about myself, I was exquisitely sensitive to criticism. Right? And if you looked at me the wrong way, I was devastated. So let me give you an example. I was asked to give several lectures to a group of therapists who were going for their continued certification in treatment of addiction. 110 therapists had signed up for the course at the University of South Carolina. I gave the course, and when you take courses for credit, at the end of the course, you have to fill out an evaluation form. Well, about a month later, I got a packet with 110 evaluation forms. 110 evaluations of my performance. And as I went through them, wow, my ego went right through the ceiling. You should see the wonderful things that people were saying about my lectures. 109 glowing evaluations. There was 110. There was one that was critical. And I was devastated. I went around depressed for 3 weeks. And it was only after 3 weeks that I recognized, wait a minute, 109 to 1 is not a bad score. Furthermore, 109 people weren't wrong. This one person probably happened to be in a very depressed mood that day and just saw everything in life as negative, and so he saw my performance as negative. But for 3 weeks, I was crushed by the fact that one person had been critical. Now you see, if you want success in life, keep your ears open for criticism. Right? And don't expect to get it from your friends because they might not want to tell you anything critical about yourself. So keep your ears open, especially from people you think don't like you, because they're likely to point out some of your shortcomings. And it's from those that we can learn. Okay? And it's from those that we can learn to become more efficient, better people, and it's criticism that will give us the key to success. So, you can see why self-esteem for success is such an appropriate term. Lack of self-esteem can be a barrier to success. Now let me point out something else about growth, personal growth. Right along the line of criticism, that you may have to expect some discomfort in growing and in becoming better. And so I'll tell you my story about lobsters. Right? Came across an article in a magazine that said, well, how can lobsters grow? After all, a lobster is a soft animal that lives inside a hard, unyielding shell. And the shell is not going to expand. Well, if the shell is not going to expand, how can the lobster grow? And the article went on to say that when the lobster feels very crushed because it has grown and now the cell has become very oppressive, right? And the lobster feels very uncomfortable. So it hides under an underwater rock formation to protect itself from predatory fish, and it sheds its shell and it grows a new spacious one. Well, as it continues growing, this new shell now becomes oppressive. Back under the rocks, sheds the shell, grows a new shell. And it repeats the process a number of times until it reaches its maximum growth. Now, what it is important to realize is that the stimulus for the lobster to be able to continue to grow is it feels discomfort. And if lobster had access to a physician, right, lobsters would never grow. They would die being an inch and a half big. Because the moment the lobster felt in any way uncomfortable, he'd go to the doctor and say, hey, doctor, I don't feel good. I don't. And the doctor would say, well, here's a Valium, here's a Percocet, and take something to eliminate that feeling. Yeah, the lobster would never go under the rock, never shed the shell, never grow, right? And it would die being an inch and a half big. So you see, we can't avoid painful experiences in growth. And our grandmothers were not wrong when they said that we have growing pains. Right? So in order to develop self-esteem, we have to be able to accept some discomfort, the discomfort of looking for our character defects. And maybe if we can't see them ourselves, maybe we can have somebody point them out to us. Maybe we have a good friend who we say, look, I won't break my friendship with you, but please, I need you to tell me what you see about me that I can be doing better. Right? There may be the discomfort of discovering the positive talents in yourself. Why is that discomfort? Because that means that we have to do something with ourselves. We might not want to do something with ourselves. We might rather want to coast along and be content like cows. So there's the discomfort in feeling I have to do more about myself because I've got the abilities. And this is the discomfort of growth. And I think that nature has taught us that when it tells us about lobsters. That in order to grow, your stimulus is going to be, you're going to feel uncomfortable. Right? And when you feel uncomfortable, don't immediately look for some pill to make you feel better. Yes, there are times when medication is necessary. But so many times in life, the situations that we find ourselves in may be difficult, right? But they may be signs, nature's signs of telling us it's time to advance beyond where you are. Learn more, do more, make yourself into a better person, make yourself into a more efficient person. Take the necessary, reasonable risks necessary to try new things in life. These are the kinds of things that are a key to success. So, self-esteem and success. Self-esteem for success. You can see why the two go together. And hopefully, if you will work on your self-esteem and improve it, hopefully you will become a better person, a more efficient person, and more successful person, and perhaps most of all, a happier person.